Ilara had survived 23 years by being invisible. She had perfected the art of it. The downcast eyes, the hunched shoulders, the way she could slip between bodies in a crowd like smoke through fingers. In the great hall of House Varin, surrounded by hundreds of servants gathered for the Lycan King's annual inspection, she was nothing, nobody, exactly as she needed to be. Don't look up. Don't draw attention. Don't exist. The words had been her mother's, whispered in the dark of their shared quarters before the fever took her. Ilara had been 7. 16 years later, she still obeyed. She pressed herself between two older kitchen workers, women broad enough to block her from view. The Lycan King was walking through the crowd. She could hear the shuffle of bodies parting, the held breaths, the quickened heartbeats of those around her. She kept her gaze fixed on the stone floor, counting the cracks, willing herself smaller. The Lycan King visited once a year to survey the servants of each noble house in his territory. It was tradition, they said, a display of his authority. Most years he walked through without incident, selecting no one, punishing no one. Most years. But Ilara had heard the stories. Servants who caught his eye and vanished into his castle, never to return. Girls who were too pretty, too noticeable, too visible. She would not be one of them. The footsteps grew closer, heavy, deliberate. The crowd around her seemed to shrink, bodies pressing tighter as everyone fought to be overlooked. Almost past. Almost. The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. Ilara could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears, could feel the trembling of the women beside her. No one moved. No one breathed. And then a voice, deep, commanding, ancient with power, cut through the stillness like a blade. You! Not me. Please, not me. Come here. Every servant in the hall seemed to exhale at once, relief flooding through bodies that hadn't been chosen. But the women beside Ilara stepped away, abandoning her, leaving her exposed in a sudden circle of empty space. She couldn't move. Her legs had turned to stone. Her lungs had forgotten how to draw air. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. She had done everything right. Everything her mother had taught her. Look at me. The command was softer now, but no less absolute. Ilara felt it pull at something deep in her chest, some instinct she couldn't name. Against every screaming thought in her mind, she raised her head and looked into the eyes of the Lycan King. He was not what she expected. The stories painted him as a monster, ancient, scarred, terrible to behold. But the man standing before her was handsome in a way that hurt to look at. Dark hair swept back from a face carved from granite and shadow, cheekbones sharp enough to cut, a jaw set with centuries of command. He was tall, impossibly tall, and broad, his shoulders blocking out the torchlight behind him. But it was his eyes that caught her, held her, trapped her. Gold. Pure, molten gold, burning with an intensity that made her soul want to flee and stay all at once. He was staring at her like he'd been struck, like the ground had shifted beneath his feet, like everything in the world had suddenly rearranged itself around this single moment. What is your name? His voice had changed, rougher now, almost shaken. Ilara's throat closed around the answer. She couldn't speak, couldn't think. The Lycan King was asking her name, and she was going to die of terror before she could give it. She's called Ilara, Your Majesty. Lord Varin had appeared at the king's elbow, his face twisted with poorly concealed anxiety. A kitchen servant. Nothing of consequence, I assure you. If she's displeased you in some way. Leave us. Lord Varen's mouth opened, closed. Your Majesty? Everyone. The Lycan King's golden gaze never left Ilara's face. Out. Now. The hall emptied in seconds. Servants fled, nobles hurried, guards retreated, all of them desperate to escape the weight of command in that voice. Within moments, Ilara stood alone with the most powerful being in the kingdom, and she had no idea why. You're afraid? He said it like an observation, like he was cataloguing the rapid rise and fall of her chest, the trembling of her hands, the wild panic in her eyes. Ilara managed a tiny nod. Something shifted in his expression. The intensity softened, though it didn't fade. He took a step back. Deliberately, she realized, giving her space, giving her room to breathe. I'm not going to hurt you, Ilara. The sound of her name in that voice did something strange to her chest, made it tight and warm all at once. I know what they say about me, he continued. I know the stories, that I take servants who displease me, that those who enter my castle never return. A ghost of something, was that a smile, crossed his features. The truth is far less dramatic. Those servants are simply happy. They choose to stay. Ilara stared at him. None of this made sense. Why was he explaining himself to her? Why was he looking at her like she was something precious, something he'd been searching for across centuries? I don't understand, she whispered. The first words she'd spoken since he'd noticed her. The Lycan King, this ancient, powerful, terrifying king, let out a breath that sounded almost like relief. No, he said softly. I don't suppose you would. Not yet. He extended his hand toward her, not grabbing, not demanding, simply offering. Come with me. I promise you, on my life, on my throne, on everything I am, that you will be safe, that you will have choices you've never been allowed before, that you will never again have to make yourself invisible to survive. Ilara looked at his hand, looked at his eyes, looked at the exit behind him, the door still open, the freedom to refuse written in the space between them. He was giving her a choice. When had anyone ever given her a choice? Why me? The question scraped out of her, raw and desperate. I'm no one. I'm nothing. I've spent my whole life making sure of it. The Lycan King's expression gentled in a way she wouldn't have believed possible 5 minutes ago. You're not nothing, Ilara. His voice wrapped around her name like a promise. You're the furthest thing from nothing I've ever encountered. He didn't explain further, didn't tell her what he meant. Simply waited, hand extended, golden eyes patient, as if he would stand there forever if that's what she needed. Ilara thought of her life in Lord Varen's kitchens, the cold quarters, the endless work, the invisibility that had kept her safe, but had also kept her utterly, devastatingly alone. She thought of her mother's words, don't exist, and for the first time in 23 years, she wondered what it might feel like to exist after all. Her hand trembled as she reached out. The moment her fingers touched his, something clicked into place, something she had no name for, no understanding of, a feeling like coming home to a place she'd never been. The Lycan King closed his hand around hers, gentle as if she were made of glass. Good, he murmured. That's good. He led her toward the door, toward the unknown, toward a future she couldn't begin to imagine. Behind her, she left 23 years of hiding. Ahead of her, the Lycan King walked with her hand in his, and she still had no idea why he'd chosen her. But for the first time in her life, Someone had looked into a crowd and seen her, and nothing about the way he looked at her made sense. The Lycan King's castle was nothing like the stories. Ilara had expected darkness, cold stone and colder silence, dungeons lurking beneath polished floors, the faint echo of screams from servants who had displeased him. Instead, she found warmth, firelight dancing across tapestried walls, the smell of bread baking somewhere distant, laughter, actual laughter, from servants who passed them in the corridors and bowed to their king with genuine smiles. None of it made sense. He led her through the great hall, up a sweeping staircase, down a corridor lined with windows that overlooked gardens she couldn't have imagined. His hand still held hers, gentle, steady, as if he were afraid she might bolt at any moment. He wasn't wrong to worry. "These will be your rooms." He stopped before a set of carved wooden doors, finally releasing her hand to push them open. "If they're not to your liking, tell me. We'll find others." Ilara stepped inside and forgot how to breathe. The chambers were larger than the entire servants' quarters at House Varin, a sitting room with velvet furniture arranged before a crackling fireplace. A bedroom beyond, glimpsed through an archway, with a bed so vast it could have held 10 of her. Windows stretched floor to ceiling, flooding the space with late afternoon light. Fresh flowers in winter, sat in a crystal vase on a polished table. "This is a mistake." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "You've confused me with someone else. Someone important. Someone—" "Ilara." She turned. He stood in the doorway, filling it with his presence, those golden eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her knees want to buckle. "There is no mistake. But why?" She heard the desperation in her own voice, couldn't control it. "I'm a kitchen servant. I scrub pots. I peel vegetables. I sleep in a room with 11 other women and own nothing but the clothes I'm wearing. You're a king. You could have anyone. Why would you?" "Because you're my mate." The word hung in the air between them. Mate. She'd heard it before. Whispered among servants, spoken of in fairy stories her mother had told her before the fever. The fated bond between Lycans. The one person in all the world meant for them. "That's impossible. I assure you it isn't. I'm human." "I know. Humans don't have mates." "No." He took a step into the room, then stopped himself. Giving her space again, she realized. Always giving her space. But Lycans do, and I've waited 432 years for mine. 432 years. The number staggered her. He'd been alive for centuries, had watched generations of humans live and die, had ruled this kingdom since before her great-great-grandparents had been born. And he was standing here, in this beautiful room, telling her that she, Ilara the kitchen servant, Ilara the invisible, Ilara the nothing, was what he'd been waiting for. "You must be disappointed." She didn't know why she said it. The words simply fell out, heavy with a lifetime of being told she was worthless. "Your mate is me." Something flickered across his face. Pain, she thought. Actual pain. Disappointed? He repeated the word like it was foreign to him. "Ilara, when I walked into that hall, I had no expectations. I've searched for my mate for over 4 centuries. I'd nearly given up hope. And then I caught your scent across a room of hundreds, and everything else ceased to exist." Her scent. She thought of herself, unwashed from a day in the kitchens, smelling of onions and lye soap, her hair limp and her dress stained. "I smell like a kitchen." For the first time since she'd met him, the Lycan King laughed. It transformed his face, softened the sharp edges, crinkled the corners of his golden eyes, made him look almost approachable, human even, despite being the furthest thing from it. "You smell like home," he said simply. "Like everything I've ever wanted and thought I'd never find." Ilara didn't know what to do with that, didn't know how to process kindness so freely given, words so unearned. Her whole life had taught her that nothing came without cost. That softness was a trap, that anyone who offered her something wanted something worse in return. "What do you want from me?" The question came out sharp, defensive. "What am I expected to do?" He considered her for a long moment. "Tonight? Nothing. I want you to rest, to eat. Proper food, as much as you'd like. To bathe, if you wish. There are clothes in the wardrobe that should fit you, and if they don't, a seamstress will come tomorrow. And after tonight? After tonight, you decide." He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, somehow making the casual posture look regal. "I won't force you into anything, Alara. Not a bond, not a bed, not even a conversation, if you'd prefer silence. You are my mate, but that means nothing without your consent. So you'll stay here, in these rooms, for as long as you need, and when you're ready, if you're ever ready, we'll talk about what comes next." She searched his face for the lie, for the crack in the mask, the hint of cruelty waiting beneath the kindness. She found nothing but patience, nothing but those ancient golden eyes watching her like she was something precious. "I don't understand you," she whispered. "I know." He smiled, and it was gentle, almost sad. "You've never been given a reason to trust anyone. I'm not asking you to trust me now. I'm asking you to give me the chance to earn it." A knock at the door made her flinch. The king didn't react, simply called out a calm, "Enter," and a parade of servants appeared, carrying trays of food, pitchers of water, armfuls of soft towels. They moved around Ilara like she was already their queen, bowing to her, asking where she'd like things placed, their eyes warm and curious and completely without malice. When they left, the table by the fireplace was laden with more food than she'd seen in months. Roasted chicken, fresh bread, vegetables glistening with butter, a slice of cake so rich it made her stomach ache just looking at it. "Eat," the king said from the doorway. "I'll leave you to rest. If you need anything, anything at all, pull the bell cord by the bed. Someone will come." He turned to go. "Wait." The word escaped her before she could think better of it. He paused, looking back. "What's your name?" Something shifted in his expression. Something warm and wondering, like she'd given him a gift he hadn't expected. "Kale," he said. "My name is Kale." Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, and Ilara was alone in a room fit for royalty with a king's name on her lips and absolutely no idea what to do next. She ate until her stomach hurt. She bathed in water so hot it turned her skin pink, scrubbing away years of kitchen grime until she barely recognized the woman in the mirror. She put on a nightgown, softer than anything she'd ever touched. Silk, she thought, or something like it, and climbed into the massive bed with its mountain of pillows and blankets that smelled like lavender. And as she lay there in the darkness, warm and clean, and fed for the first time in longer than she could remember, she thought of golden eyes and a voice that called her home. She didn't trust it. She couldn't trust it. But somewhere deep in her chest, in a place she'd locked away so long ago she'd forgotten it existed, something fragile and terrifying began to stir. Hope. 3 days passed like a dream Ilara kept expecting to shatter. She woke each morning in silk sheets, ate breakfast delivered on silver trays, and spent hours wandering the castle like a ghost who'd stumbled into paradise. Servants smiled at her. Guards bowed. The seamstress came and measured her for dresses so fine she was afraid to touch them. And every evening, Kyle came to her door. He never entered uninvited, never pushed. He simply appeared at sunset, asked if she'd like company, and accepted whatever answer she gave. The first night, she'd said no, and he'd wished her pleasant dreams and left without a trace of disappointment on his face. The second night, she'd said yes. They'd talked for hours. He told her about his kingdom, his duties, the weight of ruling for centuries. She told him about the kitchens, the other servants, the small rebellions she'd allowed herself. An extra bite of bread here, a moment of rest there. He'd listened like every word mattered, like she mattered. Now, on the third night, they sat together in her chambers, a fire crackling between them and the remains of dinner cooling on the table. Ilara had discovered she liked watching him eat. Something about seeing this ancient, powerful king tear into a chicken leg with his hands made him seem more real. "You're staring," he said, without looking up. Heat flooded her cheeks. "I'm not." "You are." He raised his golden eyes to hers, and the corner of his mouth twitched. "I don't mind. Stare all you like." She looked away, heart hammering. 3 days, and she still didn't know what to do with him, with any of this. Part of her kept waiting for the trap to spring, for the kindness to curdle into cruelty. That part grew quieter each day, but it never fully silenced. "Can I ask you something?" The question slipped out before she could second-guess it. "Anything." "The servants here, they seem—" She struggled for the word. "Happy." "That surprises you?" "Everything about this place surprises me." She pulled her knees up onto the chair, tucking her feet beneath her. The nightgown she wore, another gift, soft as clouds, pooled around her like water. At House Varron the servants were terrified. Of Lord Varron, of his sons, of each other. We learned quickly that showing weakness meant inviting pain, but here everyone smiles. They laugh in the corridors. They sing in the kitchens. I don't understand how. Kale set down his goblet, his expression turning serious. "Because I don't rule through fear." "How do you rule, then?" "Through fairness. Through consistency." He leaned back in his chair, firelight dancing across his features. "My people know what to expect from me. They know I'll protect them, provide for them, and never ask more than they can give. Fear might create obedience, but it poisons everything it touches. I've lived long enough to learn that lesson." Ilara thought of Lord Varron's hall, the constant tension, the whispered warnings, the way everyone's eyes tracked the Lord's movements like prey watching a predator. "I've never known anything else," she admitted quietly. "Fear, I mean. It's all I remember." Kyle went very still. "Tell me." It wasn't a command. It was an invitation, soft and careful, leaving room for her to refuse. But something about the firelight, the warmth, the 3 days of unprecedented safety had loosened something in her chest. The words began to spill out like water through a cracked dam. "My mother was a servant at House Varron. My father, I never knew him. She said he was a traveller who passed through. But I think she was protecting me from a harder truth." Ilara stared into the flames, unable to meet his eyes. "She taught me to be invisible, to never draw attention. She said it was the only way to survive." Your mother sounds wise. She was. The familiar ache pressed against her ribs. She died when I was 7. Fever swept through the servants' quarters, and she— Her voice cracked. She hadn't spoken of this in years. Hadn't let herself. She held on for 3 days, kept telling me to remember. Don't exist, Ilara. Don't let them see you. Stay small, stay quiet, stay alive. The fire popped. Shadows danced across the walls. After she died, I did everything she taught me. I made myself into nothing, and it worked. A bitter laugh escaped her. For 16 years, no one noticed me. No one touched me. No one hurt me. I was invisible, just like she wanted. And lonely. The word struck her like a physical blow. She looked up, found Kyle watching her with something devastating in his golden eyes, something that looked almost like grief. Yes, she whispered. So lonely I forgot what it felt like to be anything else. He moved then, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. He crossed the space between them and knelt before her chair, bringing his face level with hers. This close, she could see the individual threads of gold in his irises, could feel the heat radiating from his skin. Ilara, his voice was rough. What your mother taught you kept you alive. I will never fault her for that. But you don't need to be invisible anymore. Not here. Not with me. I don't know how to be anything else. Then learn. He reached up, and his fingers, so careful, so impossibly gentle for hands that could tear a man apart, brushed a strand of hair from her face. I have time. Centuries of it. And I would spend every single one teaching you that you deserve to be seen. Her eyes burned. When had she started crying? She felt the tears sliding down her cheeks, but couldn't seem to stop them, couldn't do anything but stare at this impossible man who knelt before her like she was the royalty. I'm broken, she choked out. I don't know how to trust. I don't know how to be what you need. I'm broken. Kale. No. The word was fierce, absolute. You're not broken, Ilara. You're a survivor. You took an impossible situation and you endured it. You protected yourself the only way you knew how. That's not weakness. That's strength. It doesn't feel like strength. It never does. Not to the person who had to be strong. His thumb traced her cheekbone, wiping away tears. You are not broken. You are not worthless. You are not the nothing you tried to make yourself into. You are brave and resilient, and so utterly precious that I would burn this kingdom to the ground before I let anyone make you feel small again. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. This man, this king, was looking at her like she was the sun, and she had spent her whole life being told she was less than shadow. Why? The question was barely a whisper. Why do you care so much? Because you're mine. Simple. Certain. Like it was the most obvious thing in the world. You've been mine since before you were born, and you'll be mine until the stars burn out. I have waited 400 years to find you, Ilara. And now that I have, I will spend the rest of eternity making sure you know your worth. He leaned closer, his forehead nearly touching hers, his breath warm against her lips. She could feel the restraint trembling through him, the iron control holding him back from closing the distance. May I kiss you? Her heart stopped, restarted, thundered against her ribs like a caged bird fighting for freedom. She should say no. She barely knew him. She didn't trust him, didn't trust anyone, couldn't trust anyone. Her mother's voice still echoing in her mind. But her mother had never met Kyle. Yes, she breathed. He closed the distance between them, and the world fell away. His lips were warm, gentle. He kissed her like she was something sacred, something to be savoured rather than consumed. One hand cradled her face, while the other gripped the arm of her chair, and she could feel the power coiled in him, the beast barely leashed beneath the surface, all of it held in check for her, because of her. When he pulled back, his eyes were molten, his breath came ragged, but he didn't push for more. "Get some sleep," he murmured, pressing one last kiss to her forehead. "I'll see you tomorrow." Then he was gone, and Ilara sat alone in the firelight, her lips tingling and her heart cracking open for the first time in 16 years. She was falling for him, and it terrified her more than anything ever had. A week into her new life, the past came crashing back. Ilara was in the castle library, a vast room she'd discovered on her 4th day, filled with more books than she'd known existed, when she heard the commotion. Raised voices echoed from the great hall below. She recognized one of them instantly, and her blood turned to ice. Lord Varen. She pressed herself against the library wall, old instinct screaming at her to hide, to disappear, to become invisible. Her hands trembled. Her breath came shallow and fast. Don't exist. Don't let them see you. Stay small. Stay quiet. Where is she? Lord Varen's voice rang through the stone corridors. You had no right to take her. She belongs to House Varen. She's our property. Property. The word sliced through her like a blade. She'd known, of course. Servants weren't people in the eyes of nobility. They were possessions, tools, things to be used and discarded at will. But hearing it spoken aloud, after a week of being treated like something precious, she belongs to no one but herself. Cale's voice was calm, dangerously calm. And she is under my protection now. Protection? Lord Varen laughed, high and mocking. You took a kitchen wench because you liked the look of her. Don't dress it up as something noble. When you tire of her, and you will, you'll send her back, and she'll need to be disciplined for getting above her station. Ilara's stomach lurched. When you tire of her. The words burrowed into the soft places of her heart, the places that still couldn't quite believe any of this was real. Lords didn't keep kitchen servants. Kings didn't mate with nobodies. Eventually, inevitably, Cale would realize his mistake. And then... Choose your next words very carefully, Lord Varen. The temperature in Cale's voice had dropped to something arctic. You're speaking about my mate. Silence. Then a sharp intake of breath. Your mate! Lord Varen's arrogance wavered. That's impossible. She's human. She's nothing. She is everything. The words were a growl, barely human. She is the other half of my soul, and you kept her scrubbing your floors for 16 years. You let her sleep in squalor while you feasted. You let her believe she was worthless while she served your house with more grace than you've ever shown anyone. I didn't know. You didn't care to know. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate. Leave my castle, Lord Varen. Leave my territory, and pray that I'm feeling merciful enough not to revisit how your house has treated my mate. Because right now, the only thing stopping me from tearing out your throat is the knowledge that she wouldn't want blood spilled on her behalf. More footsteps, faster now, retreating. Then silence. Ilara stayed frozen against the wall, tears streaming down her face, her whole body shaking. She should feel triumphant, vindicated. The man who'd lorded over her for 16 years had just been driven from the castle like a scolded dog. Instead, all she could hear was when you tire of her. She fled, not back to her chambers. That was the first place Kyle would look. Instead, she wound through corridors she'd memorized over the past week, finding her way to a small courtyard she'd discovered on her wanderings. It was tucked away, forgotten, filled with overgrown roses and a crumbling stone bench, a place to be invisible. She sank onto the bench and sobbed. She didn't know how long she cried, long enough for the sun to shift, for the shadows to lengthen, for her tears to dry into salt tracks on her cheeks, long enough to feel hollow, empty, like she'd cried out everything that mattered. "I've been looking for you." She didn't startle. Some part of her had known he would find her. Cale always found her. He stood at the entrance to the courtyard, golden eyes soft with concern. He didn't approach, didn't crowd her, just waited, patient as always, for permission to enter her space. "I heard everything," she whispered. "I know." He moved then, slowly, settling onto the bench beside her with careful distance between them. "The servants told me you were in the library. I'm sorry you had to hear that." He called me property. He was wrong. Was he? She finally looked at him, and the doubt in her eyes must have been devastating because something in his expression cracked. "I was property, Cale. For 23 years, I belonged to House Varen. I had no rights, no choices, no future beyond whatever they decided for me. And now I'm here, in a castle, wearing silk, eating feasts, and a king is calling me his mate." She laughed, bitter and broken. "It doesn't make sense. None of this makes sense." "Ilara, what happens when you realize your mistake?" The question tore out of her, ragged and raw. "What happens when you wake up one day and see me clearly? I'm not a queen. I'm not worthy of any of this. I'm just a kitchen servant who got lucky, and eventually—" "Stop." The command in his voice silenced her. But when she met his eyes, there was no anger there, only a fierce, aching tenderness. "You want to know what I see when I look at you?" He shifted closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I see a woman who survived 16 years of hell through nothing but her own strength. I see someone who was taught that her only value lay in being invisible, and who believed it so completely that she couldn't fathom being seen. I see courage, Ilara. I see resilience. I see a light that 23 years of darkness couldn't extinguish." "Cale." "I'm not finished." He reached out, taking her hands in his. His grip was warm, steady, unshakable. "I see my mate, the woman I've waited 4 centuries to find. And I don't care if you scrubbed floors your whole life. I don't care if you came to me in rags. You could have arrived covered in mud, with nothing but the clothes on your back, and I would have thanked every god I know for finally bringing you home." The tears were falling again. She couldn't stop them. "But I need you to choose." His voice softened. "I won't keep you here against your will. If you want to leave, if this is too much, too fast, too frightening, I'll let you go. I'll give you money, protection, a home somewhere safe. You'll never want for anything." "You would let me go?" "It would destroy me." The admission was raw, honest. "But yes, if that's what you need, I would let you go. Because what I want more than anything, more than the bond, more than my own happiness, is for you to finally have a choice. A real choice. Not obedience, not survival. Just what you want." She stared at him. This ancient, powerful king, offering to tear out his own heart if that's what she needed. and she realized, with sudden crystal clarity, that she didn't want to leave. She didn't want to go back to invisibility, to silence, to a life where no one saw her, no one wanted her, no one cared whether she lived or died. She had spent 23 years surviving. Maybe it was time to start living. I want to stay. The words came out stronger than she expected, certain. I want you, Kyle. I'm terrified. And I don't know how to be what you deserve, but I choose you, if you'll have me. The sound he made was barely human. Relief and joy and fierce, overwhelming love all tangled together into something that resonated in her chest like a second heartbeat. If I'll have you. He pulled her into his arms, crushing her against his chest, his face buried in her hair. Ilara, I've been yours since the moment I saw you. I'll be yours until the end of time. She clung to him, breathing him in, feeling the steady thunder of his heart against her cheek. For the first time in her life, she had chosen, and it felt like freedom. The bonding ceremony took place 3 weeks later, under a full moon that turned the castle gardens to silver. Ilara had expected something small, private, a quiet acknowledgement between the two of them, perhaps witnessed by a handful of servants. Instead, Kyle had invited every noble house in his territory, every allied pack, every dignitary who owed him allegiance. They need to see you, he'd explained when she'd protested. They need to know that you're not some passing fancy. You're their queen. Queen. The word still felt foreign on her tongue, but standing at the altar now, dressed in a gown of midnight blue that made her feel like a piece of the sky, watching Kale approach her with reverence burning in his golden eyes. She was starting to believe it. He took her hands in his. The officiant spoke words she barely heard, ancient Lycan vows about souls and eternity and bonds that transcended death. All she could focus on was Kale, the way he looked at her, the way his thumbs traced circles on her palms, the way his voice shook, actually shook, when he spoke his vows. I have waited 432 years for you, he said, loud enough for the assembled crowd to hear. And I would wait 400 more. You are my mate, my heart, my home. From this moment until my last breath, I am yours. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She didn't try to hide them. I spent my whole life being invisible, she said, her voice steadier than she'd expected. I thought that was all I deserved. But you saw me. You chose me. And I choose you, Kale. Today and every day. I am yours. He kissed her then, deep and claiming, and the crowd erupted into cheers. But Ilara barely heard them. All that existed was Kale's arms around her, Kale's lips on hers, Kale's heart beating against her own. When they finally broke apart, she caught movement in the corner of her eye. A cluster of nobles stood at the edge of the crowd, their faces twisted with barely concealed fury. Lord Varen, his wife, his 2 sons. They had been commanded to attend, to witness, to watch the kitchen servant they'd dismissed as worthless become queen of the most powerful Lycan territory in the realm. Ilara met Lord Varen's gaze across the garden. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. Simply looked at him with the quiet confidence of a woman who had finally learned her own worth. His face purpled with rage. His wife looked like she'd swallowed something rotten. The sons, who had never spared Ilara so much as a glance in 16 years, stared at her like they were seeing a ghost. Good. Kale's arm tightened around her waist. He'd noticed the exchange. Should I have them removed? No. She leaned into him, drawing strength from his presence. Let them watch. Let them see everything they threw away. A low growl of approval rumbled through his chest. My vengeful queen. I learned from the best. The celebration lasted until dawn. Ilara danced until her feet ached, accepted congratulations from nobles who bowed to her like she'd been royalty her whole life, and drank wine that tasted like starlight. Through it all, Kale never left her side. His hand stayed on her waist, her back, her shoulder, always touching, always present, always hers. When they finally retreated to their chambers now, not just hers, he undressed her with trembling hands and worshipped her with his body until she forgot her own name. Afterward, tangled together in silk sheets, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder, she said the words she'd been holding back for weeks. I love you. He went still. Then his arms tightened around her, pulling her impossibly closer. Say it again. I love you, Kale. Again. She laughed, the sound bright and free. I love you. I love you. I love. He silenced her with a kiss, fierce and desperate and overflowing with 4 centuries of loneliness finally ending. I love you, he breathed against her lips. I have loved you since before I knew your name. I will love you until the stars burn out and the world crumbles to dust. You are everything, Ilara. Everything. She fell asleep in his arms, warm and safe and loved. For the first time in her life, she didn't dream of hiding. 2 years later, Ilara stood on the balcony of the Queen's chambers, watching the sun set over the kingdom that was now hers to protect. So much had changed. She had changed. The frightened kitchen servant who had tried to disappear in a crowd was gone. In her place stood a queen, confident, beloved, fierce in the protection of her people. She had learned to read, to write, to speak in court without her voice trembling. She had established programs for servants across the territory, ensuring no one would ever be treated as property again. She had become everything she'd never dared to dream. And she had done it all with Kale at her side. Arms wrapped around her from behind, a familiar warmth pressing against her back. She leaned into him instinctively, smiling as his chin came to rest on her shoulder. You're thinking too hard, he murmured. I can hear it from across the castle. I'm thinking about how far we've come. He pressed a kiss to her neck. And where are your thoughts taking you? Back to that hall, the day you found me. She turned in his arms, facing him, her hands settling on his chest. I was so afraid. I thought you were going to destroy me. Instead, you saved me. She rose on her toes, pressing a soft kiss to his lips. You saw me when I couldn't see myself. You loved me when I didn't know I was worth loving. You gave me a choice when I'd never had one before. You saved yourself, Ilara. His golden eyes were warm, tender, still looking at her like she was the most precious thing in existence. I just gave you the space to do it. She smiled. After 2 years, she'd learned not to argue when he deflected credit. They both knew the truth. They had saved each other. He from centuries of loneliness, she from a lifetime of invisibility. I have news, she said. Something flickered in his expression. Hope, barely contained. Oh? She took his hand and pressed it to her stomach. Flat still, but not for long. You're going to be a father. The sound he made was inhuman. Joy and wonder and fierce, overwhelming love all colliding into a single broken exhale. He dropped to his knees before her, pressing his forehead to her belly, his shoulders shaking. Ilara. Her name was a prayer on his lips. Ilara. She ran her fingers through his hair, tears streaming down her face, heart so full she thought it might burst. She had spent 23 years being invisible, being nothing, being the girl who hid in crowds and prayed no one would see her. Now she was a queen, a wife, a mother-to-be, and she was seen, cherished, loved beyond measure. All because a king had looked into a crowd of hundreds and said 3 words that changed everything. You, come here. She had come, and she had found home. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new tale of fated mates, powerful kings, and love that conquers all. Leave a comment telling us your favorite moment, and we'll see you in the next story.